In 1772, a country doctor in New Jersey named Lawrence Van Derveer stood at the bedside of a man dying from a mad dog bite. There was no cure. Hydrophobia killed every person it touched. Convulsions, terror of water, suffocation. The man's family had gathered to watch him die. Van Derveer reached into his medical bag and pulled out a small jar of dried leaves and pale blue flowers. He had learned the recipe from the Cherokee. He brewed a tea, gave it to the dying man, and waited. The man lived. Van Derveer would treat 400 more rabid dog bite victims over the next 30 years. He claimed every single one survived. By 1830, his name was carried in American medical journals as the doctor who cured the uncurable disease. The plant he used became known across the country as mad dog weed. Then, in 1947, the United States government quietly removed it from medicine forever. This is the story of an American plant that calmed the nerves of a young republic, kept 1 million grandmothers asleep at night, and was declared worthless in a single sentence by a book published in 1944. Today, 1 in 11 Americans over 65 takes a prescription drug that does exactly what this plant did for free. And that drug, multiple peer-reviewed studies show, raises your risk of Alzheimer's disease by 84%. Welcome to Nature's Lost Vault. The archive opens 800 years before Van Derveer was born, in the wooded hills of what is now Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia. The Cherokee Nation had a name for a small plant in the mint family that grew along damp stream banks. They used it for what they called women's medicine. A girl reaching the age of her first ceremony was given the tea. A woman approaching labor drank it to ease the pain and quicken the birth. A mother, after delivery, used it to expel the placenta and steady her nerves through the long recovery. The Iroquois used the same plant. They brewed the powdered roots to keep the throat clean during smallpox outbreaks. They steeped the leaves and gave the tea to anyone shaking with fever or trembling with grief. By the time the first European physicians began documenting the plants of the American continent, the Cherokee had been using it for at least 8 centuries. The eastern woodland tribes across what is now 38 states all knew the plant by some name. The Cherokee simply called it the helper. In 1785, an obscure American medical text named it for the first time in a European language pharmacopoeia. The compilers used the Latin Scutellaria lateriflora, named for the small dish shape of its flower calyx, which looked like a tiny medieval helmet sitting on each stem. The common name in English came from that same shape. Skullcap. In 1787, a German physician traveling through the new United States recorded it as a tonic and a fever remedy, noting that country physicians considered it absolutely indispensable. Then came Lawrence Van Derveer, whose rabies cure spread his name across the continent, and an explosion of mainstream medical interest. In 1819, a Connecticut physician named Lyman Spaulding read a paper to the New York Historical Society documenting testimonials from dozens of doctors across 7 states who had used skullcap to treat hydrophobia. By the 1860s, the plant was so established in American clinical practice for treating hysteria and diseases of the nerves that it earned a place in the United States Pharmacopoeia, the official drug compendium of the federal government. It stayed there for 53 years. When skullcap was finally moved out of the primary compendium in 1916, it was not because anyone doubted it worked. It was because a war had started, and the pharmaceutical industry had finally found a way to win it. In 1910, a man named Abraham Flexner published a report that would erase American botanical medicine in a single generation. The report was funded by the Carnegie Foundation and underwritten by John D. Rockefeller. Flexner visited all 155 medical schools in the United States and Canada. He had been trained in the new, purely chemical scientific paradigm. He held a sharp bias against what he called the non-conformist schools. He singled out eclectic medicine, naturopathy, and botanical medicine. He labeled them charlatanism and quackery, and recommended their total elimination. The eclectic physicians were the keepers of plants like skullcap. They had built an entire branch of American medicine by merging indigenous botanical knowledge with European herbalism. Their masterwork, King's American Dispensatory, published in 1898 by Harvey Felter and John Uri Lloyd, ran to over 2,000 pages. For skullcap alone, Felter and Lloyd listed 11 separate clinical indications: nervous illness, tremors, the delirium of fevers, epilepsy, and the involuntary jerking movements of chorea. Within months of Flexner's report, Rockefeller's General Education Board began offering medical schools enormous financial grants. Washington University in St. Louis received the equivalent of over $2 million today. Yale, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Columbia all received Rockefeller money. But the grants came with strict conditions. Schools were told to drop botanical departments. They were told to restructure entirely around pharmaceutical training. Schools that refused lost their accreditation. Students who graduated from unaccredited schools could no longer get a medical license. By 1925, half the American medical schools that taught botanical medicine had closed. By 1939, the last major institute shut its doors. The final generation of physicians who knew how to use skullcap had been pushed out of mainstream medicine and labeled quacks. Then came 1944. The United States Dispensatory was the most authoritative drug reference in America. Inside the thousands of pages of its 25th edition, the editors made room for exactly one paragraph on skullcap. They declared the plant essentially destitute of medicinal properties. They wrote that any reported effects could be attributed to suggestion. They called 172 years of mainstream American clinical practice and the 200,000 doses dispensed by American pharmacies every single year a folk superstition. 3 years later, in 1947, skullcap was officially erased from the national formulary. The pharmaceutical industry needed the space. In 1955, a chemist working in a Hoffman La Roche laboratory in New Jersey accidentally synthesized a chemical compound. The company sold it starting in 1960 under the name Librium. 3 years later, they released a refined version. They called it Valium. By 1978, Valium was the most prescribed drug in America. Over 2 billion pills a year. The benzodiazepine era had begun. The class that replaced skullcap targeted the same receptors in the brain. The natural compounds in skullcap bind to the docking site on the human GABA-A receptor, where Valium, Xanax, Ativan, and Klonopin lock into place. The plant was doing chemically what the pills do, gently, and without the brain rewiring that produces brutal physical dependence. But the pills became a $3 billion a year industry. Today, 8.7% of Americans over 65 take a benzodiazepine. In Europe, the number climbs to nearly 30%. The American Geriatrics Society lists them on its strict criteria of medications that should almost never be prescribed to older adults. Yet 44% of those prescriptions are written anyway. A massive research team tracked thousands of patients over 65 for decades. They found that taking a benzodiazepine for 3 to 6 months raised the risk of Alzheimer's disease by 32%. Taking it for more than 6 months raised the risk by 84%. The drug that replaced skullcap is, study after study, associated with the very dementia it is most often prescribed against. This is the trade we made in 1947. We removed a plant the Cherokee had used safely for centuries, and we replaced it with pills that double the risk of the disease our parents fear most. But the plant never left. In 2003, a Massachusetts psychiatrist named Paul Wolfson ran the first modern double-blind clinical trial of skullcap on humans. The group taking the freeze-dried plant reported reductions in anxiety scores at every dose tested. Cognition was barely affected. No participant reported any side effect. No liver enzyme abnormalities appeared on any blood panel. In 2014, a larger trial gave healthy adults skullcap 3 times daily for 2 weeks. The group showed measurably improved mood. The carryover effect suggested a lasting, structural calming of the nervous system, not just an immediate sedation. That same year, a research team finally ran the phytochemical analysis the dispensatory had refused to do. They isolated the active compounds and confirmed their binding at the benzodiazepine receptor site. They also confirmed binding at the serotonin receptor implicated in premenstrual syndrome, panic, and disturbed sleep. The mechanism that 19th century doctors had described as a quieting action on the nerves was, in molecular terms, the same mechanism Valium used. The Cherokee grandmothers, the country physicians, the eclectics, all of them had been right. The 1944 dispensatory had been wrong. There is a footnote worth knowing. There are 2 plants commonly called skullcap, and they are not the same. The plant the Cherokee used is Scutellaria lateriflora, native to North America. The other is Chinese skullcap, a different species used in traditional Chinese medicine for liver conditions. They share some chemistry, but not the same use. When referencing the American nerve tonic, only the Chinese plant is meant. Today, the plant the government called worthless grows wild from Maine to Florida, from the Atlantic coast to eastern Texas. It thrives in damp woodland edges, along stream banks, and in shaded ditches where the ground stays moist. It has paired leaves and small 2-lipped flowers that range from pale blue to lavender to pink. The flowers bloom from July through September. It can be grown from seed in any backyard with morning sun and afternoon shade. It returns year after year as a perennial. The leaves and flowering tops are the medicine. A teaspoon steeped in water taken just off the boil for 10 minutes is a single dose. The water should not be at a rolling boil. The active compounds are heat sensitive, and the volatile oils carry part of the calming action. One warning comes from a real problem in the commercial supplement market. Skullcap has been heavily adulterated for over a century with a different weed called germander, which is highly toxic to the liver. Every reported case of liver injury attributed to skullcap has, upon testing, traced back to germander contamination. Wild harvested or homegrown skullcap from a verified seed source has no documented liver toxicity. The plant the Cherokee called the helper is waiting right now in the damp, shaded woodlands of 38 states. It calms the nervous system without dependence. It does what 8.7% of older Americans take a highly addictive pill for, and it does it without the 84% dementia risk that pill carries. If this vault changed how you see the medicine in your own cabinet, do not let this knowledge disappear again. Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the notification bell. Every like and every share bypasses the algorithm and helps preserve what corporate medicine tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.